Well everyone, after 3 long years of waiting, the day has finally come. Ever since this game's initial announcement all the way back in January of 2017 as simply being called the Avengers project, there was certainly a heavy amount of intrigue and curiosity as to exactly what this game was going to become, especially considering the fact that this game is going to be the very first installment within a future lineup of Marvel titles to be published by Square Enix, since both companies are currently contracted within a multi-year, multi-game partnership, which was then later on followed up by future statements coming from both the president of Square Enix himself, Yosuke Matsuda, as well as the creative director of the Avengers project with that of Sean Eskai, claiming that 1, the Avengers project as a whole is going to completely outsell and outperform the entirety of the Batman Arkham franchise as well as the previous Marvel superhero game with that of Spider-Man PS4, and that 2, the Avengers project was going to be a completely original and never before seen organism within the realm of video games. Not only that, but it was also revealed back in E3 2019 that the Avengers project, which has now been rebranded as simply Marvel's Avengers, is going to be a complete amalgamation of a plethora of developers, ranging from that of the primary developer of the game with Crystal Dynamics, an entirely brand new studio made just for this game of Crystal Northwest, Eidos Montreal, Nixie Software, Marvel Games, and the entirety of Square Enix themselves. So after setting such a prestigious stage, you can surely understand now as to exactly why my expectations have been so high for this game ever since it was initially announced. And as it stands right now, after having played the Marvel's Avengers beta for myself 3 days straight on the PlayStation 4 platform, as well as knowing that this game is less than 1 month away until it releases worldwide, it aches me to say that Marvel's Avengers is a fun but still heavily flawed experience that fumbles on execution. And simply considering the magnitude of expectations the developer set forth for themselves, the final result of the game, or at least what I experienced within the beta, doesn't necessarily live up to my own viewpoints as to what I would assume would come from a AAA Marvel game in the year of 2020. For starters, we first have to understand exactly what type of game Marvel's Avengers is. This has easily been one of the most perplexing aspects about Marvel's Avengers overall, and this specifically relates to exactly how the game was being marketed to the general public. Following a rather mixed reveal presentation of Marvel's Avengers back during E3 2019, the game itself was trying to heavily display a more single-player, story-driven oriented experience. And while that might be a part as to what Marvel's Avengers is, they didn't start analyzing the core factor of Marvel's Avengers until much, much later. And even though the creative director of Marvel's Avengers is trying to claim that this is an entirely brand new experience within the realm of superhero video gaming that we've never seen before, I don't necessarily see the validity in that statement after having played the beta for 3 days straight all on my own. And in turn, the final result of Marvel's Avengers is best described as a hybrid between Marvel Ultimate Alliance as well as other looter-shooter games like that of Destiny and Anthem. But to clarify, that isn't necessarily a bad thing. It all depends on exactly how that type of gameplay format is executed. And based on what I played for myself, I can surely see that it needs a lot of improvements before it can officially become the superhero dream game that all of us fans are waiting for. Because when I think of incredibly iconic characters from the Avengers team that we all know and love, like that of the Armored Avenger Iron Man, the Super Soldier Captain America, the God of Thunder Thor, and many, many other heroes that will be included within this game's story as well as to be featured down the line within post-launch content, I think more within the realm of incredibly high-octane action-filled set pieces as well as narratives that truly showcase the inner struggles that these characters deal with on a daily basis. And instead, I don't think about something as mundane for characters like the Avengers in the realm of looting for gear, opening chests, or even monotonous mission objectives like that of Capture the Flag or King of the Hill. And yet, that is exactly the type of experience that Marvel's Avengers is, and will surely continue within that formula for years to come. For me personally, and shockingly enough to say, I actually had quite a lot of fun playing through the A-Day mission even after having seen it more times than I can count. And knowing that's just going to be one of the many other set pieces that will be included within the main game come launch, seeing that the game's intriguing and ever-evolving narrative is going to branch off from A-Day with that of Kamala Khan as the main protagonist, a heavy focus on AIM dominating the world, and attempting to reassemble the Avengers back together on the path to victory, is surely going to make for a rather encapsulating narrative. But even with all that known, it pains me to say that instead of Marvel's Avengers solely being a campaign-driven experience, it instead heavily focuses on high amounts of team play while trying to explore several different environments located within the Marvel Universe. And while these visually engaging environments do range from a plethora of settings, like that of high-scale bounded cities, heavily weather-filled tundras, underwater bases, and even outer space, I still don't believe that can save the game's faults of its highly tedious and extremely repetitive mission structure. While the mainstay hero missions like that of A-Day and the other campaign-focused narrative beats are going to be the main highlight that I will find for myself in Marvel's Avengers, the most important draw of the game, which is going to be a make-or-break factor come release, is the highly team-centric Warzone missions that the main gameplay is centered on. However, the amount of variety that you can find within these missions is sadly next to none. Even though you are able to explore these many hub worlds and see what secrets they find, the main objective, one way or another, simply revolves around beating up a plethora of enemies that lie in your wake. And after defeating the same amount of aim robots over and over and over again, no matter which Avenger I was playing as, it started to get old really fast. And alongside of that, even though you start to get used to each character's playstyle the more you actually spend time with the game, the overall control layout that each character has does feel incredibly stiff and unpolished, which in turn can significantly impact the game's combat to feel rather jarring. It also doesn't help that, at least in the case of the beta, the AI that is set for your companions of the other Avengers characters if you're not playing with your friends is sadly almost non-existent, where in an instant they'll simply go off beating enemies that aren't even close to you or just get stuck within parts of the environment. Not to mention that the biggest fault that I could find within the game's beta is obviously the heavy amount of frame rate drops that do occur when fighting a butt ton of enemies. And this wasn't just when teaming up with online companions, but it was also when playing solo as well. And given the type of game structure that Marvel's Avengers has, it absolutely without a doubt needs to have a solid frame rate by the time the full game releases on September 1st and September 4th. However, to the game's benefit, which is one of its most appealing points, is to simply jump within a war zone and team up with 3 of your other friends. This is easily one of the main areas as to where Marvel's Avengers shines the brightest. And knowing that there will be other heroes to play as, more regions to explore, and other missions to partake in with said friends as the Avengers is surely going to make for some rather entertaining experiences one way or another. But as for how long those experiences will last, it all depends on the amount of variety and fluidity the gameplay will offer. And as of right now, it's sadly not giving me a whole lot of confidence as to what the final product will entail. Essentially, it all boils down to 2 extremely important factors. First is exactly how well layered the game's gear system is going to be come launch, and second, how fleshed out each character's movesets will be once you start upgrading them within the plethora of skill tree branches. Now, to begin on a positive note, let's start with the latter. While it is fair to say that each playable character within the Marvel's Avengers beta felt relatively different from one another, they still basically had the same exact combat blueprint which was tailored to each character. And as a comparison to another major Marvel game, which also follows a similar combat structure but also relates to 4 different types of the same character, is none other than Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions, where in that game, even though there were 4 different types of Spider-Man to play as, they each managed to have their own unique combat style which did differ in every other dimension. Or as another comparison, we also have Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Out of the Shadows, which in my personal opinion executed combat in almost a perfect manner for each individual turtle's playstyle. But in the case of Marvel's Avengers, while the variation is there for each character, they didn't do enough to try and fully differentiate them from every other playstyle. This is because they all have a similar super move structure with that of the support, assault, and ultimate abilities to try and enhance their superpowered skills. And while there are characters that specialize in more of a brute force approach, like that of the Incredible Hulk, or a much more tactical and resourceful approach like that of Black Widow, I still think there can be a lot done to fully flesh out these characters even further. And in fairness to the game's benefit, it was confirmed that only one singular branch of the skill tree for each hero was available within the beta version of the game. So knowing that there will be other branches within the skill tree to unlock an upgrade for each individual character is surely going to be interesting to compare a brand new playable character at launch, starting off with that and then fully upgrading them to their max potential down the line. But again, if the main draw of the game is going to be nothing more than a button masher taking out hordes of enemies on a repeated basis, then it is surely going to lose its appeal relatively quickly. Especially considering that this is a game that the developers want to have you play for years to come. If they don't sell you on that gameplay loop at launch, then it's not going to have any more legs to stand on. This also applies to the extremely lackluster gear system that the game has, where the overall amount of importance that that feature within the game has now been shredded to an extremely minuscule amount. While it doesn't matter to me that the gear that you can equip for each character is not cosmetic in any way, the primary appeal with the gear system has essentially been shot down by the developers themselves, considering by simply pressing one button, you can then equip the best possible gear in your loadout to add on to each character. There's not a whole lot of variety or depth within this customization system to make gear all that appealing, but if the developers happen to recognize that default by the time the game releases, then hopefully it can feel a bit more polished come launch. In the end, everyone, I don't believe Marvel's Avengers is a great game by any means. However, I will acknowledge that it does have a lot of potential. One of the reasons being is because of the game's live service nature. While I do believe that Marvel's Avengers will be a relatively moderate experience come launch, I do think that maybe a few months or even a year down the line that there could be a lot more added into the game to truly visionize exactly what Crystal Dynamics had in mind for this project to begin with. As a fair comparison to another game of this magnitude, this also directly relates to Star Wars Battlefront 2, where at the beginning of that game's release, it was deemed as one of the worst products that ever came out of EA. But wouldn't you know it, a couple years later, it then started to visualize exactly all the great aspects as to what the game could become, and is now redeemed as one of the best Star Wars games that you can currently play. So because of that, I really hope that Marvel's Avengers doesn't follow within that game's footsteps of its initial failure only to be a great game later on down the line. And instead, I really hope that this can be a great game initially at launch, and then even further grow even more down the line as we do get into the later years of content. But in the end, everyone, I do think that the Marvel's Avengers beta was a fairly adequate experience, and while there is a lot that needs to be improved upon before it releases, I do think there's a chance the developers can pull it off if done right, which is why my final review of the Marvel's Avengers beta is going to be a solid 7 out of 10. If you're a major Marvel fan like myself, I can easily see you playing this game for days on end, especially teaming up with your friends to make an even more enjoyable experience. But again, the monotonous missions and tediousness of repetitive combat do get in the way for me to actually enjoy the game at full force. And if you at all care about my own personal thoughts, I would actually hold off purchasing Marvel's Avengers at launch, and instead wait a few months until more content is included within the game to get a more fleshed out experience. But no matter where you stand on that front, only time will tell to see exactly what Marvel's Avengers will become later on down the line. And with all that said, everyone, that's my overall review of the Marvel's Avengers beta, and please let me know your own thoughts in the comments section down below. But with all that said, everyone, thank you all so much for watching. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel if you did enjoy. Stay merry, Marvelites, and without further ado, peace out.